Whoa, we made it to World Bee Day on YouTube live streaming. Man, that was a bit difficult. I had a couple of technical glitches, but such is life, in the buzz of the world. These things happen, and you got to be able to adapt just like bees and everything else. But welcome to all 20,000 plus species of bee out there in the world, including all of your beekeepers that are watching this or going to be watching this in the near future. Thanks for joining us on Beeway Online. This is my channel. I've been doing beekeeping for just over 20 years now. It's been a phenomenal journey for me. I started off as a part-time beekeeper. I got involved in a project for a Rotary club in South Africa, actually, for a community project that they wanted to start. I did bee removals for about 3 years, first sort of really part-time. Then I went into it semi full-time and started growing my business. I went into pollination. I went into training. I did all sorts of things. And I love bees. I'm passionate about them. Hopefully that'll come through in my video and you can enjoy watching the rest of the chat all about the buzz today. And yeah, there's a couple of things I want to talk about. I'm in a lot of different places on the net, and I'm out there in the hive mind. And there's a lot of things that keep coming up, the same stuff that keeps coming up, whether you're already a beekeeper, want to be a beekeeper, or aren't a beekeeper at all and don't want to get involved in becoming a beekeeper. There's a couple of things we're going to be talking about today. And this is what all about the buzz is, World Bee Day. Now, thankfully, because of World Bee Day, there's been a hell of a lot of involvement and highlights and influence, and in a good way, and some some good, some bad. All of it is important, I think. Fueling debates all over the world about bees and other pollinators. Who's more important? Who's not? Why is it only about the bees having a special day, etc., etc.? Now, I think some of the debate about this is really good. It fuels the understanding about how important pollinators are, not just bees, but all of them. The flies, hoverflies, birds, butterflies, the whole including all 20,000 plus of the bee species that are out there. Only about 38 to 40 bees actually make honey in the world. The rest are like carpenter bees, mason bees, solitary bees, bumblebees, etc. Orchid bees, those are the most beautiful ones, by the way. They're kind of like the supermodels of the bee industry, or the bee family, if you like. Go Google those. Orchid bees. That's ORCHID. They are absolutely stunning, and they come in almost, what do you call it? Is it bioluminescent? I don't know if it's bioluminescent, but they're luminous. They kind of like have this shimmer in them. They're beautiful. Anyway, back to the honeybees, which is why we're here. Lots of guys in the northern hemisphere right now experiencing spring. Every colony is thriving, generally speaking. The ones that survived through the winter up there in the north, and the guys in the south, you guys are having obviously the converse of that, or the inverse of that. You've got winter on its way now. Things are going to get cold. You want to maybe join your weaker colonies, combine them together. You want to be able to take off any extra supers or any extra boxes that you have on your main box at the bottom, your brood chamber, and to ensure that there's not over an excess of bee space, effectively for them to monitor with internal climate control and their thermodynamics inside the colony coming up over the winter period now. But the people in the north, guys, lots and lots of questions coming out from newbies and new beekeepers around the world, about all the new queen cells that they have in their boxes. Now, most people, when you're doing beekeeping, whether you're starting out fresh or you are, an established beekeeper, you're gonna come across queen cells in your colonies around springtime. It's bees. It's their natural way. It's their instinctual way of how they propagate themselves. It's not a bad thing. Generally speaking, bees have been doing this for a lot longer than us. It's funny when people a lot of people will bees need management, and I'm like, they can potentially operate more effectively with some help from us in some instances and in certain circumstances. But generally speaking, bees have been doing this for a lot longer than we've even known them to be around and to be beneficial for us. So generally, my methodology, my approach to beekeeping is to leave them be. Just to focus on the stuff where they need help, like with pests, and when they need brood management. Because we've given them a home, it's usually a limited space, and as they grow, we need to help them grow. So you add on boxes when it's springtime and summer, and then you reduce those down in the winter, in the kind of toward the end of autumn, beginning of winter. And the reason being is because that thermodynamics is important to bees. Okay, they control the internal climate. It has to be about 36 degrees Celsius. That's the prime spot, for the eggs and the larvae, but also for the wax not to melt, but for it also to be retain its structure, to keep the brood safe and to keep the honey safe and all that sort of stuff. And as well as the cappings that go over the honey when it's ripened. When the moisture content's gone from like anywhere up to 70% down to below 20%. Now that ranges anywhere from 16 to about 20%, depending on where you are in the world. The FDA states that they require your jarred honey to have a moisture content of no more than 18.6%. The reason for this being that if you put that honey in a jar, that there is a chance that then it's going to ferment. Anywhere above 20%, it will likely actually ferment. But that does vary as to where you are in the world. Remember, honey is hygroscopic. Now, what does that mean? That means that basically it can absorb moisture from its environment. So if you leave if you store your honey in a non-airtight packaging or container, the likelihood is that if there's any moisture in the ambient area, it'll absorb that, and then that moisture content will go above 20 degrees, and it's likely to ferment over time, which is probably how in nature humans at one stage found out about mead, or version of mead, a fermented drink, and that's how we also actually probably got into keeping bees in the first place as well. Between honey and mead that they found, where essentially spilled honey became mead, and we found it and we drank, or fermented drink anyway. And it's kind of like a process over probably millennia that we have then become more au fait with the benefits of bees. And here we are today, sitting with a celebration day around the world where people are talking about bees, including me. So thank you for joining me on Beware Online today. And if you don't see me today, hopefully you'll see me somewhere else after this in a recording. And let me know in your comments below what you've done today for World Bee Day, what you learned, what was something new that you came across. And it's awesome that to have you on board. So what did you learn about bees today in World Bee Day? On World Bee Day. Yeah, cool. So there we go. So here's a couple of things. Okay, in the Northern Hemisphere, if you've got queen cells, I would not destroy them. Okay, in all the courses that we give, especially around splitting colonies and making new bees and stuff like that. And brood management, which is really important. That's making sure that you give the bees enough space and or enough frames with new comb inside their in the brood chamber. When you get queen cells, you will get queen cells not in the southern hemisphere now during the winter period, not likely, but in the northern hemisphere, which there's a lot of chatter about that at the moment, and a lot of newbies posting photos and videos and asking questions about this. A lot of people will say, kill the queen cells, the extra queen cells. And my personal opinion on that is all of these queen cells matter, okay? And you never know. If you're a newbie, you're not necessarily going to know if the queen cell that you have is the last one, is the only queen that you're going to get in that colony, because the old queen has already left. She swarmed off, okay? So unless you actually know, and you've been an experienced beekeeper through 3 or 4 seasons, and you know what queen cell you have, and or somebody has politely, like myself, politely answered a question of a video or photo that you've posted online somewhere on social media about whether you've got, what kind of queen cell have you got? Have you got a superseded queen cell, which is one that's going to replace your existing queen or the queen that was in your colony? or ones that are now going to be used for splitting. And if that's the case, if it's other option, you don't want to destroy the queen cells, because you don't know what stage your queen's at, the current queen is at, the existing queen is at. You don't know if she's left. You don't know if she's injured. You don't know if the ones that are still in queen cells that haven't emerged yet are going to, one of them is going to be the one that replaces the colony, the queen's colony at the moment. So what can you do with the queen cells? Well, you can split them. You can transfer them over to another nuke box with some other donor type frames that you need, which is the sealed larvae and open eggs rather, and including the bees, because the nurse bees, you need to take those with. Okay. The other thing that's important is that you need to do that with every queen cell that you decide you want to split with. So every queen cell that you cut out or harvest by using a Swiss Army knife, your hive tool, very carefully, whatever the case is, take it off the comb where it is without breaking it, without breaking the seal. You're going to move that over into a nuke box with 5 frames in it. And one frame is going to be, you're going to have to take a frame from a donor colony. Ideally, it's from the same colony that you took the queen cell from, because A, that's going to create some space. And all then you're going to do is you're going to take an empty frame, the frame from the nuke box, you're going to take that frame and place it in the same spot where you've taken the one out that's got the eggs in it, okay? And the nurse bees. Remember, you don't want to shake them off, but just make sure you don't have an existing queen on that frame when you transfer it over, okay? On any of the frames that you transfer over to a nuke starter, check that you don't have a queen in there. And then you're going to need to take a sealed queen frame over, a sealed frame over rather, and put that in the same box. Once you've done that, place the queen cell underneath the top, in between those two frames. Use a bit of the comb that you use to cut that cell out. Just manipulate it like a little bit of plasticine or putty. Place it just between the two frames or on the underside of one of the top bars in the corner somewhere, so that it doesn't fall down. It's not going to break. It's not going to get destroyed or damaged or injured over the period of time. It's only going to be 2 to 4 days before she emerges, this queen. Okay. So once you've done that, put that box. Ideally, you move the donor box away, the parent box, the original colony away, 2 to 5 meters away, and they'll be fine doing that. And you put the nuke box, this new starter box, in the same place, facing the same direction of where the original box was. Right. The reason why you do that is because all the returning foragers, all the bees that are coming back to home, are going to treat this new colony as home, and it's going to boost that colony up with numbers, which will help them to keep their brood alive and warm at night and to keep them going. Okay. So once you've got that sorted, leave them there for a while. You want to check that colony in a week. I'd say to 10 days after the queen emerges, you should have new laying eggs in that colony. Or you could even potentially sell them. That's another option as well. But yeah, that's what's happening in the bee world at the moment in the northern hemisphere. In the southern hemisphere, you want to be taking your boxes off. You want to reduce the amount of space. You want to join weak colonies together. You want to do things fire breakers, okay, for fire, and also for pests like ants. Small hive beetles are important right now at the moment. You can be, southern hemisphere bees, especially in southern Africa, are, small hive beetles endemic, so they manage the bees themselves as long as they're healthy and well. They manage the hive beetle rather themselves. But you can place small hive beetle traps inside, either in the northern or both in the northern hemisphere. All the southern hemisphere is cool. You can place diatomaceous earth in there, or vegetable oil, or any other kind of non chemical oil that's going to let the the small hive beetle fall in, but not damage anything else inside the hive. And then just check that regularly on a weekly basis. You can empty it out, and if you've got small hive beetles, cool. Another thing that I think is really important at this point in time is, as I say, a lot of people are posting up about their splits that they have, or the queen cells that they have. Guys, don't worry about it too much. It's nature's way. It's their instinctual way of being able to propagate and spread. And it's springtime, man. This is what they do. And this is what the buzz is all about. Okay. This is how bees actually thrive and survive, is that they create new queen cells. Those queens emerge. A lot of them will swarm off. Yes, you may lose some honey production. But at the end of the day, if you follow what I was talking about earlier on about what you can do with those queen cells, is cool. How to avoid getting as many queen cells as what I've seen out there with newbies are getting, actually, is simply to make sure that you're inspecting your colonies on a weekly basis. Okay, especially if you're in the northern hemisphere right now, or if you're in a nectar flow in the southern hemisphere right now, which can be happening around mangoes. Not so much mangoes; they don't really provide that much honey. But you do have mangoes, you do have blueberries flowering, you do have some eucalyptus flowering at the moment. And then coming up soon will be things like citrus and lychee, pears and apples and all those sort of things. So when that sort of stuff comes along in the southern hemisphere, you're going to have massive nectar flows coming on. In the northern hemisphere, you've got everything pretty much coming on at the moment as well. So the bees are going to get vibey, they're going to get crazy, they're going to get like really grow and expand super fast. Okay, we're talking about 1,500 to 2,000 eggs a day being laid. That means that you're going to have 1,500 to 2,000 workers coming out on a rotation basis over a 30-day period, starting from when they effectively understood spring to be taking place, which is probably about a month ago. And this is the amazing thing. So about bees and what else is going on at the moment in the northern hemisphere. So essentially, you could be doing splits. You should be harvesting honey. How to know when to harvest honey? Well, essentially, there's a lot of questions about this too. Like, when can I take my honey off? Generally speaking, if bees have a nectar flow, they are reluctant to close or to seal the cells, even though the moisture content might be correct. The honey might be ripe. If they don't have enough space to store any more nectar coming in, then there is a chance that they don't seal that honey off. Okay, so make sure on your weekly inspections, if you see that you've got 7 frames in a super chamber that are now built out, built out, and the comb is being filled, put on another super, put on another box. Okay, because those bees will fill it up within a couple of days. They will build it and start filling it up within a couple of days. And then they don't have any more space. And that creates the whole idea of them wanting to do splits. Okay. So it's a perpetual situation that you want to be able to add supers and do harvests and replace those harvesting boxes off with empty supers, so that the bees can continually have enough space to cater for the population that they have, plus any expansion that's coming in the brood chamber. All right. So harvest when you can, but replace it with empty boxes at the same time. Eventually, you may end up getting to the point where you have like 3-4 stacks of honey boxes on honey chambers, or super chambers, as we call them, shallows, in southern Africa, on top of your boxes. And so that is the cool thing about the summer period in the northern hemisphere at the moment. But something else I want to talk about as well is different kinds of pests. So we've got mites happening at the moment. I'm of the opinion of I don't try and treat my hives or colonies at all if I can help it with chemicals. So I use the drone baiting system or methodology, where basically you take out a brood chamber frame and you put in a super frame into the brood chamber at the bottom, the deep chamber. And what this does is, as long as you only have a starter strip on there, the bees then build the comb and they build drone cells. And the mites prefer the drone cells because they're meatier, they have more nutrients, etc. And what ends up happening, as soon as, if you have mites, varroa mites, then what ends up happening is that the bees, just before they seal the drone cells, the mites get inside there, and then once they seal, they get stuck inside that drone larva cell. Okay, and what you end up doing is you then, as soon as those cells are sealed, you remove that frame and destroy it. Okay, and then just repeat. Once you've taken that comb off, put it back in the frame, put the frame back in the box. Once you've done that, you're going to end up having another round, if you like. If that's necessary, you can do that. So, that's how I would. That's how I handle any mite issues. All right, and in terms of small hive beetle, you can use small hive beetle traps. They're pretty easy to use if you need in the northern hemisphere. Um, yeah, so we had a couple of questions about how to process the beeswax. So there's a number of ways. The easiest way is just to double boil the stuff. You take one pot with water in it and another pot on top of that, put your beeswax in there with some water in it, let that boil to the point where it can only get to boiling point, but let the beeswax melt at the top, all the debris and all the impurities, whatever the stuff, most of that sinks. You might have to do this at double, and then you scrape, let it settle, let it cool off, scrape the beeswax off the top, and then empty it out, wash away all the debris and stuff, throw it out, and then repeat the process until you get to the end result. To really fine tune and clear the beeswax from major debris and stuff like that, or minor debris, I should say, is you can put that the melted beeswax through a sieve. And then in addition to that, you can then also use pantyhose as well. Put it through, once it's really hot, you can put it through a new pair of pantyhose or stockings, and that'll also take out any of the really fine stuff and really give you a beautifully finished product. That's how and what do you use it for? Okay, so ideally, you wouldn't need to do any of that with regards to any cappings that you take off a frame of honeycomb, because that stuff shouldn't have any debris in it. So keep that separate from anything else that we're talking about in terms of beeswax. And that beeswax that comes from the cells, the cappings, that stuff is like gold. Okay, it's really the top-notch quality of beeswax. It's the whitest beeswax you're going to get, and it's perfect for using in skin products. So skin creams, lip balms, wound balm, anything like that. Anything that's not really a capping, generally speaking, I would repurpose that either for making more wax sheets of your own or wax strips of your own. The other thing you could use it for is making candles, which is awesome. Get cotton wick, make candles out of that. It's another way of making some extra money from your hobby or your little business, depending on what size you are, or just to use them for yourselves. And then the other thing that you could do is, and this obviously is a bit limited, the use of this is a bit limited, but you can use that old wax, especially the dirty wax, if you like, as swarm lure. You mix it with a little bit of propolis, put it into 90 proof, 180 proof alcohol or 90% alcohol, and let it be extracted over a period of like 2-3 weeks. And then when that's done, just strain it all out. And then what you can do is, because the alcohol will evaporate, I use that to paint the back of my nuke boxes and my catch boxes, and paint it like a little bit, 2 strokes at the back and then 2 strokes along the top bars, 2 or 3 of the top bars. And that's going to smell just like home. The alternative is, if you don't want to do that, you can just use the actual raw material, the beeswax with a bit of propolis, mix it all together, melt it if you need to a little bit, so that it forms a nice shape that you might want to use. Don't go above 75 degrees Celsius, and then that will work perfectly as a bee lure or an attractant in your colonies, in your catch boxes, and so on and so forth. The last thing that you might want to do is, especially if you don't want to use, or if you have enough of the cappings, is just give it back to the bees. Ideally, the same colony that you took the comb from, so that you can so that there's no transfer of any diseases that might happen between colonies. And the bees will just clean that up, and then they'll repurpose the wax themselves. Okay, which is pretty cool. So you can repurpose your beeswax, pretty much on all of those different kinds of varieties of ways. And that's it. But yeah, in terms of pollination, guys, we've been doing an episode, or I should say a series of episodes regarding like micro MBAs, which are focusing on the growers' side of things, or farmers' side of things, as to what the impact is that comes from bees, okay, pollinating their crops. Now, there's up to about 70 vegetables and plants and fruits and whatever the case is that are, I wouldn't say completely dependent on honeybees, but they do depend on honeybees. The bee factor that honeybees promote pollination for on crops is really, really high. So it's 50% or more, which means that those bees those crops or those fruits or those vegetables, whatever the case is, if they didn't have honeybees going on there, then your fruit set is lower, your yield is lower, the quality is lower. And believe it or not, things like the sugar content can be lower as well, or different. The size and the weight will be different. Maybe even the shape can be different as well, which is phenomenal. That's what I've been finding in my research over these. I've done about 8 of these episodes now around the micro MBAs with regards to things like apples, blueberries, avocados, pears, mangoes was the most recent one. And it's amazing how, like, for example, blueberries, you end up having not only a difference in the size and the weight of the blueberry, but you also have a longer shelf life in blueberries when bees are used. Okay, honeybees are used to pollinate them. So that to the grower or the farmer is phenomenal, but also us as an end consumer, it means that we can have blueberries for longer and ideally, potentially even cheaper. And the reason I say that is because they don't need to be necessarily flown out overnight, for example, or air freighted as much as they might have been before without bees. So there's a whole economic, bee economics basically around this. My micro MBAs that I'll discuss about what can be done with regards to utilizing honeybees in pollination, and the type of effect that they can have, not only on our food security, but also on the quality of our food and the grade of the food. So the farming industry, the agricultural industry can grow without using pesticides and fertilizers, any more of that stuff than we really are already using, which is pretty hectic and intense in my opinion at the moment. All they have to do is start using honeybees on a more regular basis, okay? Because the lowest kind of impact that you get from this use, where there is definitely studies and research in the amount of impact that happens from bees on the fruit sets and fruit yields, etc., including on seed production as well, is out there, guys. It's out there. I'm talking about it. I'm emailing about it. We found countless news research online that I'm going to be talking about on more videos coming up. We've already had interviews with Professor Honey Human on our channel, on this very channel, around the blueberries and the macadamians and the research she's done. And that's only 2 crops. Now, bearing in mind that macadamians on one hand is like one of the lowest impact influenced crops or nuts that happen when you introduce honeybee pollination, right? You're looking at maybe 12 to 13% is the more common thing that's found, but it has had results of up to 70% that's been found, okay? So again, it's going to vary across cultivars and the way that the honeybee pollination being managed on site, as well as the pest control, not pesticide control, rather the spraying that takes place, etc. So, but on the low end, if we take the 12 to 13% for macadamians, do you understand the difference to that grower is like about $1,000? You know, anywhere between $1,000 to $1,500 per hectare that they get. You know, it's a massive difference. When you start adding up that if you've got 100 hectares, that's a huge impact to that farmer and to his entire sort of downstream. The beneficiation of that is they have more money to utilize to plant more. Maybe they don't have to use as much fertilizer anymore that they thought they used to, because, you know, or they can use an alternate fertilizer now because they're getting a higher yield and a bigger fruit, a bigger nut. Okay. They're making more money, so maybe they can hire more people to do more work on the farm. More farming communities benefit from that. And then the end consumer, us as the end consumer, get a better nut. You know, we get more of the same nuts, and so on and so forth. All right, and then we go to the other end of that spectrum where you end up having avocados. Now, avocados are, again, get pollinated not just by honeybees. They get pollinated by hoverflies and flies, and they get pollinated by butterflies and all sorts of things. They've got one of the highest abundances of pollinator visits across the board. Okay, but honeybees have a bee factor influence on pollinating with avocados, which is about 85%. All right. So, and again, this is down to cultivar, so don't quote me. That's us. This, you know, out of the research that we know of in South Africa, cultivars may differ. It might be a bit lower in other cultivars, 65%. But the fact is that the more honeybees that you have in an avocado orchard, not only the higher the yield, but the higher the fruit set rather, the higher the yield, the better the shape that you end up getting as well. Okay, and you also end up having a drop. Funny enough, you end up having a drop in the average net weight of the end product, the end fruit. And the reason being is that because now the tree, which is able to produce X amount of fruit at its optimum, if you're having more fruit, it has to spread those resources across more and more of the fruit. So where on average you may, without honeybees being placed on an orchard, maybe you end up having a what do you call it? An average of about 260 grams per avocado, whereas now you have about 5 halves per hectare pollinating, and you're paying the farmer grower is paying you as a beekeeper, for example, to have your bees on there 5 hours per hectare over the flowering period. Now what ends up happening is that and let's say the average was about 50 kilograms of harvest on an avocado in these particular cultivars. Now I'll get to your question in a minute, Jack. From 50 kilograms on average per when this research was done per tree. This is per tree. You go to 150 kilograms per tree. It's a 300% increase in fruit set and yield. Now you calculate the value of that to a farmer or a grower. Okay. Now the beekeeper would probably get around, in South Africa anyway, Southern Africa, the beekeeper could get anywhere between say 900 and 1,200 rand per hive, for the flowering period, okay, of those avocados. When you calculate the value to the farmer versus what the output would be to the beekeeper, it's negligible. Okay. Now remember, the beekeeper is not going to get a hell of a lot of honey out of this because they're overpopulating the area. That's why there has to be compensation for the beekeeper. On top of the fact that they're going to have losses, they're going to have potentially going to have pesticides and insecticides sprayed on the orchard, which ends up potentially affecting the colonies. They also have to pay for toll gates, so they have to pay fuel, maintenance on their vehicles, insurance. They need staff. All this sort of stuff comes into play, and then the bees also, by the time they finish pollinating, they also decline in their population. They decline in their health as well for a while they get until after they get moved off the farm onto potentially uncultivated area like blue gum, eucalyptus, etc. To answer your question, Jack, thanks for coming on. Awesome to have you. Okay, so what flowers can you plant to attract bees? It also depends what kind of access you have to flowers, but generally there's a lot that you can plant that we do have a couple of videos about this, but if you're talking about just on your homestead or your small holding, anything that you feel is so dandelions are awesome. Don't pick them. Don't mow them at the moment if you're in the northern hemisphere. Dandelions are awesome for bees. What do you call it? There's the what's the one in terms of ones that you can eat. So there's lavender. All the different kinds of lavender are really good. Rosemary is fantastic, and these are also edible, which is cool. Okay. You can also get what's the other one called? Basil is a really good one. Sweet peas are good. Again, they all benefit from having bees as well. Okay, so you can hollyhocks is a good one. We've said basil. Chilies can be a good one. Green peppers are a good one. Again, all edible. If you really want to benefit bees, then things like sunflowers are good, but ideally you want to have heirloom seeds and not GMOs and not hybridized seeds. Okay, if you're going to plant from seed, you don't want to have a GMO and you don't want to have a hybridized seed. So ideally you want to go to a shop that sells heirloom seeds, and what heirloom seeds means is that it's the seed as it was naturally, without any kind of hybrid or cross hybridization, like you can do with dogs, for example, or horses. You can take one type of horse and another type of horse and create a new breed, basically. Same with cows. The same thing happens with flowers and seeds, okay? And specifically, you want to avoid things like actual GMOs, seeds that have undergone GMOs. So that's things like soya. What's the other one? Or wheat, you won't get any, they're not useful for bees. But maize, corn, same thing, not useful for bees. But those are the kind of things as examples anyway. As to your next question, when is the swarming season? Well, it depends what season, what hemisphere, or if you're in the northern hemisphere, it's now. If you're in the southern hemisphere, which I think you probably are, then it'll only be end of July, beginning of August. Okay, if you're in the southern hemisphere. But so what you want to be doing now is watching my videos and reading the Blue Book, for example. This is one of the books, the best books you can get on beekeeping. And although it's about beekeeping in South Africa, it's really is the Blue Book. We call it the Bible of beekeeping in South Africa, but we've sent it all over the world, because it's just got everything in there, including pollination tables, which are quite difficult to kind of get hold of out there. And to give you an example, you can plant a lot of fruit trees, although that's going to take 3 to 5, 6 years for those to actually pollinate or be ready for pollination and to actually fruit. You can plant things like most herbs will be great for the bees. And another way of being able to get hold of bees is to use lemongrass oil, only 2 drops at the back of the hive when it is swarming season for you. Okay, so that's the way I would do it. If you don't have any beeswax already or propolis to use, like I talked about earlier on, that's the way that you want to do it. Alternatively, you could potentially, like I said earlier on, find out if there's somebody in the area who's got queen cells at the moment that they don't want, and before they start squishing them, if they've been told by somebody to squish them, you can then go and collect those queen cells and start your own colonies from that, your own apiary from that. Okay, so that's what I would use in terms of or get ready in terms of your swarming season that's coming. And if you're in the northern hemisphere, then as I say, it's now. You want to take your nuke box, you want to place it at an elevated position, either in a tree that's strapped and secured properly and level, or on an unused roof of a shed or something like that, or even if it's just on a stand. So just that it's off and above ground, okay, above ground level. And you ideally want it facing, I would say, away from any oncoming wind and out of the way of any public traffic, really. And then essentially in a nearby spot where there is going to be either currently bees foraging or are going that there is going to be something that starts flowering in the near future, like in the next week or so. And the reason being is that all the scout bees that are going out to find forage are going to now also find your nook box that you've now laced with swarm lure or lemongrass or whatever the case is, or the beeswax that I spoke about early on, if you can get some from somebody, or if you have some that you've stored from a previous season or something like that. So that's what you want to be doing at the moment for swarming season. But in terms of what else you guys might want to know as hobbyists. So I've been talking about pollination quite a lot. How can you guys take advantage of pollination or the idea of pollination as a hobbyist? So a lot of people probably don't want to be moving their bees. So what can you do about that? You can plant bee-friendly plants, which we do have a lot of those. We have a bit of a library of those on the channel as it is. You're welcome, Jack. So what you can do is just do some. I mean, I can actually probably have a look up here because I don't typically actually focus on planting my own bee plants per se, because I am not a hobbyist beekeeper anymore. But if I'm having a look at what other things you can actually plant that aren't either trees or in orchards, whatever the case is, things like coriander, pumpkins, buckwheat is champion. Man, if you can plant buckwheat, which is also edible, it is like it's the non-indigenous, it's like non-native, if that makes sense. It's an agricultural crop in a lot of countries. But if you can plant buckwheat, bees go moggy for that stuff. Okay, so not only do you get more buckwheat produced per yield if you're a farmer or a grower, but you get a really good food source for the bees. The only problem with it, though, is that it can be a little bit of a darker honey. So it's not going to look like the stuff in the shops. Like I said on my Facebook Live, the stuff in the shops, in the EU, I think it was about 6 years ago, there was a study done or check done on 350 bottles of honey or jars of honey across the EU. How many of those do you reckon were tested for adulteration? Now, that doesn't mean that they were PG or 50 rated, adult rated honey that you couldn't, that your kids couldn't eat. What it means is that it's basically been fiddled with. Okay, it's been cut with corn syrup or other kinds of sugars, glucose-based sugar. And the problem with that is that then you're not actually buying honey. And all 350 of those samples that were tested came up as having some form or other of adulteration. In other words, they were at some level or other, they were not 100% honey. Okay, so it's 100% failure rate from all of the bottled and jarred honey at the time when this test was done. You can Google it. I talked about it in one of my episodes about the 11 common issues for beekeepers, whatever the case is. When we talk about fake honey is a huge global issue at the moment, especially with the likes of it being, because it's commoditized. Manuka has become a massive issue. There's only X amount of Manuka that actually gets produced in New Zealand, but there's tons and tons, thousands of tons of it available in excess to what gets produced. So you tell me, how does that happen? Okay. So the problem with the only problem with buckwheat itself is that the honey is a bit dark and it's a little bit like molasses. Okay, it's not that dark, but the flavor or the taste of it is a little bit like molasses. So pumpkins, squashes, awesome. And watermelons. This is one of the things we're going to be doing in my future micro MBA is watermelons is next, actually. And the benefit that you can get, actually you get like a 90% extra fruit set, 90% extra. So in other words, for every one watermelon that a grower or farmer had before, they used honeybees, they're now going to have basically 0.9 of another watermelon forming per plant. Okay, that's phenomenal. Okay, so watermelon's awesome. Watermelon honey is absolutely to die for. Okay, it's one of my favorites. Thyme honey is my actual favorite honey, so you can plant a lot of thyme. I find it a bit difficult to grow. Sunflowers is awesome. Lucerne's pretty good. Kidney beans are really, really good. Wild peas, cool. Let's have a look at what else there is. We've got a bunch of different kind of aloes, blue bushes, puzzle bushes, ericas. Buckwheat is good. That's a tree. Let's see. Proteas are good. That's Southern Africa, South Africa, Western Cape of South Africa. But the weeds that are really important not to cut or not to mow down are going to be blackjacks, cosmos, dandelions, plantain, ribwort, wild radish, winterweed, and a bunch of others. Cool. So those Blue Book, if you're interested in a bit more of those, but typically any of the herbs that you kind of eat or that you cook with, actually you could probably plant in your garden and the bees will use them as well. Okay. What else do you guys want to know? Send your questions. You're very quiet in the chat. I'm happy to answer any questions that you come along with, as long as I can answer them. I'll tell you if I can't. But I have been, for the guys that have just joined us, I have been keeping bees for about 20 years, and that's included like doing, commercial bee removals, through to keeping bees myself, through to doing pollination, through to opening up a bee store, and then, doing all of that sort of stuff, and helping with projects all around Southern Africa, and so forth and so forth. Amazing stuff. In terms of what else can you do with your bee colonies and the products that you get out of your bees, let's maybe talk about that, because most people, first of all, think that, funny enough, think that honey comes from pollen. I don't know how many countless times I've seen in articles online and in books and things like that, even in some cases headlines where people say, that bees get their honey from pollen. From collecting pollen. I'm like, no, dude, no. it's not from pollen, it's from nectar. They're usually on the same plant, but not always the same quality. Okay. But yeah, honey is not from pollen, it's from nectar. And what can you do with pollen? Well, bees use it to make bee bread, what's called bee bread, and it's usually what the colorful things look like when you take a frame out of a hive and you have a look at a frame and you look at it and like, oh, what the hell are those cells that have like yellow and red and pink and orange colored and sometimes even brown colored, kind of like almost like jello kind of looking stuff in your cells. Well, that's pollen bread, guys. That's the pollen sources that they use to feed your brood, okay, and the eggs, because that's the protein for the bees. So just like us, we need meat and chicken and or whatever your choice of protein is, your source of protein is. Bees need that too, and it's largely a case of that is the food that's the majority of that is fed to the eggs and the larvae, and obviously they all have to have honey, nectar as well, as a form of carbs. That's their carbohydrates. So like if you dig your McDonald's chips, hopefully you don't get from McDonald's, but if you do any kind of chips or any kind of carbs, rice, etc., that's where they get it from, the nectar. And then once the moisture content goes from like 70 odd percent moisture through various processes of dehydration that the bees form that they do in a hive, the moisture content drops, and part of that is their thermodynamics, that they control the internal climate of the hive with that moisture. Okay, once it gets below 20 degrees, 20% moisture content, which you can test with a refractometer, by the way, you can then say that honey is ripe, or the nectar is ripe. It's become honey now. Then generally what will happen is if they've got enough room and enough space in the colony, they will start sealing it off. If you're checking your stuff weekly and you see that you've got 7 frames full of comb and they have built and they filled them, and then you need to put a new super on, okay? Because they're going to fill those other 2 or 3 frames within a week, okay? And if you don't do that, what ends up happening is that they keep those cells open because they don't have any more space to put the incoming nectar anywhere. So they just keep the cells open and they just reutilize and repurpose, refill the as and when they can use it, they refill it, okay, and they just top it up. And now you think that you can't harvest, but actually what's happening is if you haven't given the bees enough space in order to close those, when the nectar flow stops, then they will seal those cells off with cappings. Okay, so the ideal situation is to make sure that you keep adding supers as and when your bees are starting to expand. Then what will happen is that as they build and extend the comb, build out the comb in the second super, and start utilizing that space now as the opportunity to fill up, what ends up happening is that you'll start finding that the super below that, they'll start capping those cells, okay, because they don't need them anymore to be capped. Your hive's been standing empty since December. Is that a problem? Yeah, just check, because you probably have pests inside there, Jack. You probably have spider, maybe 1 or 2 spiders in there, and maybe a couple of crickets or something like that. If you had wax strips in there, or especially if you had wax foundation sheets, full foundation sheets in there, you may even have encouraged some wax moth potentially in there. Unlikely, but potentially. Just have a clean out. Check that you don't have some foreign bodies in there, and you may even have a little mouse in there, or whatever the case is. But you're generally going to probably have spiders because they kind of like those empty spaces. So clean it out. Use a bee brush or a end of a broom, whatever the case is, or your hand itself. Make sure that everything's emptied out, and then use your lemongrass. Only 2 drops, right? Only 2 drops at the back, and then you should be good to go. Okay. The reason why it's a bit surprising that it's empty if you're in the Southern Hemisphere, by any chance are you in the Eastern Cape province? It's the lowest populated area for bees in the country. My only other thing is that you may not have had a lure or enough of a swarm attractant in that box. You may want to elevate them, as I say, put them on a roof or elevate it, secure it to a tree within reaching distance, ideally that's easy to what do you call it, access when the bees move in, and then place the lemongrass in there, lemongrass oil. Okay, two drops is ample. But you may want to find yourself a spot where there is a farm nearby, or somebody that's you in the Western Cape. Okay, so if you're in the Western Cape, then you've got not much coming on at the moment, besides mangoes and blueberries. Okay, but the chances of getting onto those probably a bit slim at the moment, and you may have to travel quite far depending on where you are in the Western Cape. But after that will be apples, and there's ample of that around, and there'll probably be a number of farmers, other farmers that would be interested in having your hive placed there, or people that living within a 2 or 3 kilometer radius of those orchards. Okay, so what you want to do is move your colony, make some buddies, make some friends, post on your social media, whatever the case is. Ask around people that have small holdings or small scale farms, or whatever the case is, that are going to have any of those kind of things flowering at the moment. And you're going to ask, and you're going to say to them, look, I'd like, depending on when they're going to spray, you just want to make sure when they are going to be spraying that your bees aren't there, or that your box isn't there either, so it doesn't get affected by any spray treatments. But bait it, move it, leave it, because whenever you're going to end up having scout bees and foraging bees going to these things that are going to start flowering, they're going to find your box, and then they're going to check it out, and then it can take, remember, this time of year it's not likely, okay, but when there's a colony in the area, when there's an existing colony in the area, that colony, in order for them to split and take advantage of your box, can take anywhere from the starting point to the queen emerging and leaving around 18 days to 21 days. Okay. If it's a tracking colony or a splitting colony, a split off of an existing colony, then that split is going to leave, again, there it's taken them 20 days to create that split to happen. Okay. And then if you've moved your box within that 20-day period, even if the scouts found it and now you've moved it away, they're not going to have anywhere to put them, go, because you've moved your box. So bear that in mind. But you can, I've been a bee chaser. I've been a crop chaser, let's say, a nectar flow chaser before, where I was doing, kind of pollinating regularly, and mobile. You can, what you could do and this is something I teach on my we used to teach on the advanced course a few years back, and what we used to do is we used to chase the nectar flow chases of sunflower, because they flower, like, for 3 weeks or so they flower, and then there's about a week of gap. And for every hour that you travel north in South Africa, so starting like Bloemfontein area, in the Orange Free State province, when they start flowering, they're the first ones to start flowering. You can take your colonies there. If you're big enough, you can take your colonies down there, or if you're in the area, you can take your colonies there in Bloemfontein, Orange Free State area. You could take your bees there as soon as they start flowering. And in fact, even just a week before they start flowering, place your colonies around those sunflower farms. Man, I took 30. I'll tell you a story, man. I would take 30 of my empty nook boxes. I wouldn't really use lemongrass oil, because I already had my own swarm lure that I make myself, but lemongrass would have worked fine. So I'd baited nook boxes, 5-frame, 6-frame boxes, only with starter strips in them. And I'd take my 30 of boxes out there, place them around these sunflower farms, and within a week, 10 days, almost all of them would be full. Okay. So it's really about just having a little bit of know-how about how, if you want to get that involved, you don't have to have 30 nook boxes, but all it is knowing where to put your boxes. If you're not getting a luck, if you're not hitting luck like yourself, it sounds like you didn't hit any luck wherever you are, or as you say, maybe you moved it around too much. Lavender and eucalyptus oil drops. Lavender probably, eucalyptus maybe, but again, you don't want to use more than one drop. One drop's enough, because what's going to end up happening is if you don't have lemongrass, what's going to end up happening, right, is, or even if you have lemongrass, if you use more than one, or if you use more than 2 drops, okay, then and this is neat now. Okay, this is not mixing it with some other, melted beeswax or something like that, which may not be a bad idea, because then you'll infuse the beeswax with the lavender and the eucalyptus and a bit of your lemongrass. But again, in like a tub about that size, like this, okay, which by the by is homemade. It's homemade. What are your beard balm? Okay. Which has jojoba oil in it, because it's really good for hair. Okay. In a tub like that, all you need is about 3 or 4. In fact, probably 2. If you're going to do lavender, eucalyptus, and lemongrass, you need like just 2 drops of each in a tub that size. And then what you're going to do in each nook box is you're just literally going to get a finger, a dab, a finger, wipe the opposite side of the entrance, the furthest side of the entrance away. You're going to dab it there at the back, and that's it. That's all you need. And then make sure that you have an elevated spot, ideally, and that it's secure. So I used to place bricks on mine, but you can use whatever you need to use. Make sure it's secure. Okay, make sure that wind's not going to blow it away, or that it's not going to fall over or be bumped over or something like that in a bad storm or whatever the case is. Make sure that it's also as level as possible, especially for rainwater. You don't want rainwater getting in the entrance and then staying in the box. So you must make sure it's as level as possible. If it's not level, have it leaning slightly forward with the entrance at the bottom end of the angle, okay, of the water, of the flow of any water that might get in there. But yeah, cool. Any other questions? I see there's 1 or 2 other people watching. That is awesome. Thank you for joining today. I think we're just about time to wrap up. If there are any more questions, now's your time. Here's your chance. If you haven't joined us already online for my newsletters, they are free. That's where that micro MBA goes to, and a bunch of other things as well. Join us here for free. That's for our newsletters, and that's articles and our micro MBA about pollination. Cool. Well, thanks for joining us, guys. If you don't know about us, you're on the channel. There's loads of stuff that you can watch in the playlist about beekeeping and homesteading. There was tons of stuff on there. I used to go on with Tanya Milan from Self-Sufficient Homesteading and Gardening. We used to go on weekly and talk about all kinds of homesteading stuff as well as beekeeping stuff. That was a weekly thing that we did a couple of years back. And then there's also my other playlist about bee-friendly flowers. There's the series that goes on about the 30-day challenge. I think we're only on day 11 at the moment, but there's a lot of stuff in there about how to catch bees, how to lure bees, how to look after your bees, problems for beekeepers, pests for beekeepers, uses and byproducts for bees, etc., on the YouTube channel. And then there's also a bunch of things about queens and checking out queen cells and what makes a really good brood pattern, and what kind of maintenance you should be doing on brood, or how to replace old brood, which is also important. if you've been in beekeeping only for 1 year, you are coming up to a point now in the southern hemisphere where at the end of the winter period, if you really had bees for a season, you are going to want to do brood management, which is taking out the old darker comb out of one or two of the frames of the brood come August, so that you can replace it with new comb or new wax foundation or wax starter strip, for example, so that the bees can then build new comb. The reason being is that you want the queen to have replenished cell space for new cells to be built, because after a period of time, what ends up happening is every time the queen lays an egg, it goes through the process of being an egg. Larvae emerges as a worker or a drone. The next batch, before the next batch of eggs get laid, the nurse bees go in there, they clean everything out, and then there's a new layer of wax that gets put on that. Okay, a little bit of propolis and wax gets put in that cell, so it's sanitized and hygienic and whatever, ready for the next egg. And essentially what ends up happening over time is that you start off with a really healthy brood cell, okay, and over time it starts shrinking. Okay, so you end up with effectively almost ending with a point where you have smaller bees in your colony because the cell size does shrink. And then you end up with also at some point, you have a point where the queen actually can't lay anymore. And when the queen can't lay anymore, that's when they start filling those cells with honey. And eventually what ends up happening is your brood space, where the queen's supposed to be able to, your engine for new bees, the queen can't lay because she can't get her hips, bless her voluptuous, lovely, egg-filled hips. She can't get her abdomen down into the cell, to the bottom of the cell, to lay an egg. And as soon as that starts happening, guys, they start filling that with honey, and that's when that frame becomes what's called honey locked. And that entire frame on that side then cannot have any eggs in it, and you start losing 10% from that frame, 10% of your brood space where she can lay on. Now your entire colony's egg laying capacity drops by 10%. That will continue to perpetuate throughout that brood space over a period of a season or two, 3 maybe, until such time as that they have to abscond. There's they have to leave that property, the bee space, okay, because the property in there, the real estate's become unusable in terms of being able to make enough of a population in the colony to sustain it. And that's when you have absconding, and people end up finding like really dark colored comb in their hives, and they think, oh, what happened here? And actually what happened there is that after the comb gets reused all the time, it gets a layer of propolis on it. It gets darkened and darkened and darkened and strengthened over a period of time. But eventually it goes black if it gets completely left. And it gets, the only thing that it can be used for then is for honey. Okay. So you end up with this dark brown to almost dark black colored comb full of honey, and that's all it's used. You can use it for. You can't use it for anything else. And in brood space, that's a dire error, okay, on the beekeeper's part, because the bees can't do that themselves. So what ends up happening is that they just leave, they abscond, okay. No fault of the bees. Just their natural instinct is that over time, what will end up happening is that they'll split first, send off a bunch of queens with, say, 5 to 10% of the colony every time that a queen goes, and that does reduce the colony population over that period of time while that's happening. But eventually it gets to a critical point where whatever colony is left can't sustain itself, and then the entire colony will just leave and abscond. Okay, cool. So to anybody who's watching this who doesn't use Langstroth hives, I'm just going to cover some stuff quickly here, because there's probably potential audience here that don't use majority of the stuff on YouTube. They can't really utilize because they don't use Langstroth hives or national hives or the modern hives, if you like, that we use with frames. Okay, there are, because I work in Africa with different with traditional hives and that sort of thing. We end up having which is going to be one of my upcoming videos we're going to do on different hives that are available throughout history and current. But a lot of people are still hobbyist beekeepers or sustainable living beekeepers where they've got a little small holding. That's where they live. They keep chickens, they keep all kinds of things like we used to in the old days, but they also keep their 1 or 2 hives, and their 1 or 2 hives are in log hives, okay, or bark hives. And a lot of maybe what we're doing, what I'm talking about today, is kind of like over their heads. Okay, not over their heads, but it doesn't even matter. It's kind of like doesn't actually even mean much, because the methodology and the system that they use with bark hives is not a frame-based system. It's literally you have a bark or a log hive, and the bees, once the bees move in there, they kind of build their own. They build a comb inside there, and it just gets closed on one end, and the entrance is on another end, and the 2 pieces of the log can come apart. And when that happens, they use a bunch of smoke. The comb all gets broken, and effectively almost the colony gets destroyed or badly damaged. Okay, in the process of trying to get access to the honey that's inside, and so a lot of what we've been talking about today doesn't apply much to the traditional colony management, but there are ways of being able to do this with what is a what do you call a top-bore hive. So top-bore hive doesn't really use it doesn't use bark hives or log hives, but it is kind of loosely based on the idea of keeping log hives, if that makes sense. So it's, instead of it being a staggered, a vertically staggered method or system, it's a horizontally used method or based system. Okay. Again, in a lot of those, you end up using frames. In modern beekeeping, we use frames in those, but it's easy to use. It's a bit easier to use those without using the mechanization and the machines and all the equipment that you'd need to make more modern Langstroth type hives, frames and hives, where you have wire and all those sort of things in it. In a top-bore hive or a Kenyan top-bore hive, all you really need to do is have the top frame, the top bar of a frame, and attach a thin strip of wax into that and melt it in there so that it stays. And as soon as you're placing those in a line, now the bees are going to build in that. Obviously, you don't want to have all 15 or 20 top-bore frames in there access all at once. You're going to compartmentalize it with a cardboard or a piece of wood, like 5 frames deep from the entrance. Okay, and as they start building like this towards where that box, that piece of wood is, or cardboard is, whatever the case is, you can lift it and move it back and give them another 5 frame space. Eventually, what's going to end up happening is the bees fill up that space completely in that box, in that top-bore box. And what will end up happening is that you'll find that at the end, from the entrance going backwards, the larva and whatever will be at the front, and as they move their way back, the honey will be at the back. And the reason being is that the honey is the most valuable thing. Okay, so eventually what ends up happening is that you can harvest from the back of the box the honey and leave the front of the box for where the brood is, and whatever the case is, not really disturb that at all in the top-bore hive. That's one of the benefits of using top-bore hives or Kenyan top-bore hives. But unfortunately, because there's no wire on there and whatever the case is, harvesting is again going to be quite invasive, because you're going to end up crushing all of the comb and using a wax press for that, or using a conical strainer or cheesecloth or whatever case. You're going to crush all the comb and to get the honey out. And then ideally what you can do is either keep that comb and use the beeswax for, like what we've said already, either making creams, skincare products, or the next thing could be candles, or the next thing could be more wax sheets, wax strips, if you like. Or in this case, I would actually just give it back to the bees, put it back into the box that you took it from. They'll repurpose it, which is awesome. You could also use that as formula. Obviously, once it's clean, you don't want it to have honey on it. You want to wash the honey off, collect the honey, whatever the case is. Awesome. So I don't see any more questions. I think unfortunately, we had a technical issue earlier on today when I was meant to be on at like 2 p.m. GMT time. or was it 3 p.m. GMT time? I can't remember. But had a technical glitch, so anybody that was coming to have a look is now only going to be able to watch the replay after the fact. But yeah, thanks for joining us today. It's been awesome. Just sharing hopefully stuff that you guys are going to be able to find useful. Thanks for coming on, Jack. It's been awesome to have you. Check to see if you can subscribe to the newsletter if you aren't already on there, which would be awesome to have you guys join us. Again, although typically we talk about Apis mellifera scutellata and sometimes capensis, which are the two honeybee species in South Africa. We do have a stingless. We have the Mopani bee, which is a stingless bee, and I think there's one other one. I can't remember the name of it. I think there are actually two that might be in Southern Africa that are stingless bees that actually make honey, but they're tiny. They're literally literally less than 5 mils in size. But we do have a variety of those types of honeybees, and the capensis is quite a special case because it's the only bee that we know of in the world, at least honeybees in the world, that can actually lay. The female worker bee can actually lay unfertilized female eggs as well. So they basically clone themselves, which is phenomenal, but also bloody scary because if people think that the mites are a problem, and they are, don't get me wrong, small hive beetles, Asian hornets, mites are a problem. But I'm going to state this again, like I did in a recent interview that I had with Dr. Hanneli Human about macadamians and blueberries. We talked about the other potential risks involving beekeeping at a global scale. Fake honey came up, obviously, so did mites, so did Asian hornets. But I think there's a dark horse here, okay? And the dark horse is the capensis, Apis mellifera capensis, okay? And the reason being is because once this little worker comes into your colony of Apis mellifera scutellata, it's a slightly darker, slightly smaller bee. Well, I say slightly darker. It's darker and slightly smaller in size. But once it comes into the colony, it gets treated like an insider. So usually it gets treated like an insider. And usually it can do this. It can come into the colony when there's a nectar flow. And once it's inside the colony, unfortunately, it can mimic the same pheromones and scent of that colony's queen, okay? And what can end up happening is that she also can start laying worker cells and also cause the host colony to terminate their own queen, because they think that this capensis worker is the stronger, newer queen in the colony. And eventually what ends up happening is that they overtake, like a cancer almost, they overtake that colony and can wipe out that colony. And the problem is that despite efforts to control and manage capensis from moving from its natural space or natural geographic area, okay, which was roughly along the Great Escarpment of Southern Africa or South Africa. So it was largely regionalized. It was regionalized in the Western Cape largely, and bits and pieces of the Eastern Cape along the Great Escarpment and into the Karoo Desert. So there was maybe a 50 to 100 kilometer radius, not radius, but delineation, a zone where there was a no-fly zone. So there was a kind of like a zone where the Cape bee didn't go, and there was not a scutellata bee in that area either. What ended up happening is somebody took capensis bees over that borderline, and then brought back a bunch of the bees once they were finished pollinating, brought them back into the Cape bee area. And in the process of doing that, a bunch of bees absconded. The Cape bee absconded, and a bunch of those bees then infiltrated Scutellato beehives, and what ended up happening is now that they've spread. Okay, they're being found all in the northern part of South Africa as well, all over the country, unfortunately. Now, just like when American foulbrood hit South Africa in the late 80s, early 90s, the Capensis was also, and there was a massive issue of having to destroy tens of thousands of colonies at the time to try and control the spread of it. The same sort of thing happened with Capensis as well, and it wasn't successful, unfortunately. So I think the dark horse for risk factors in terms of beekeeping is going to be probably fairly the underdog, perhaps. But I think that we're sitting with a ticking time bomb over the next 10, 15 years, where you're going to end up having not only Capensis bees being a pest, okay, but you're going to have hybridization of the Capensis and the Scutellatas already taking place, where you have some drones of the Capensis, where there are Capensis colonies now, fully Capensis colonies in the Scutellata area. You're having hybridization where the drones are being mating with Scutellata queens and vice versa, and you're having this crossbreeding of Scutellata with Capensis, and who knows what that may bring as well going forward. Maybe they're both pretty good producers in terms of honey and pollination and all those good things. That's not the issue. The issue is how's the genealogy going to change, so that we may end up with a hybrid bee that may or may not see more females being able to lay workers, also being able to lay eggs in future, which was not possible outside of the Capensis species, okay, and outside of this Western Cape province area. Dark horse issues. But yeah, guys, listen, if you're in the Northern Hemisphere, something else to avoid is feeding your bees right now, unless they're ultra weak or ultra new. Don't feed your bees for more than a week, because if you do, you're going to adulterate. You're going to end up having sugar in your honey, and nobody wants that. Okay, so lekker, guys. Shanana, I hope this has been helpful, useful. If you only get to watch this on the replay, please make sure that you guys comment. Let me know what you guys have been up to on World Bee Day or over the next couple of days for celebrating World Bee Day. What are you doing with your bees, whether it's about Bee Day or not? We've got a couple of cool things that are up and coming, and including our next episode on the Micro MBA series for pollination, which is going to be watermelon. If you want that, subscribe. I've posted the link in the chat here, but otherwise you can get on to www.beware, that's BEEWARE.co.za/subscribe. It's free. You get a ton of other little articles coming through every 2 or 3 days. You can unsubscribe anytime, which is also cool, up to you, but why would you, and then obviously, as and when I've done all the research, this last one on mangoes took me over 2 weeks, because funny enough, I struggled actually to find. It was one of the much more difficult. It's actually been the most difficult crop that I've had to find, or fruit rather, that I've had to find any research on, with regards to the difference between what happens when you use honeybees and whether you are not using honeybees, but you have hoverflies and just let there be open pollination, and what the difference is between those two. Because let's face it, most people tell you, anybody that you speak to, including the guys I spoke to at SAMGO, which is the South African Mangoes Growers Association, turned around and said, well, basically the bees don't have much of an impact. It's mostly that mangoes get pollinated by hoverflies. And unfortunately, this is a mentality that is found across not only the agricultural colleges, but because they don't even teach really much about pollination, other than perhaps that bees can pollinate your crops. I'm finding that a lot of the growers and farmers aren't taught. The new students that are coming into play aren't taught about the actual ins and outs. You could spend at least a week, only on what the benefits, how to utilize, how to organize, how to manage the bees on the sites, how to avoid spraying, at the right times, when the bees are going to need to not be sprayed, when the orchard should be left alone, how to plant pollinizers within your orchards to maximize the pollination visitors and visits, where to place the colonies. There's a whole like science around this, guys. Okay, it's not rocket science, but the more you know, the more you don't know. The more you know, the more you don't. The more that you don't know. If that makes sense. But if you don't know anything, you don't know anything. You don't know what you don't know. Okay, so yeah. Anyway, the mango guys told me, that there are a couple of people that use. Oh, when I asked them the question, how many, do they know anybody that's using bees specifically? Nah, they don't use bees. Most of them don't use bees because the hoverflies do it. Okay, Surfidea hoverflies are touted to be the main pollinators, and that's true. Except for in my MBA, I've proven, because I found the actual research, that bees are about 50% of the contributors to pollination when combined with an actual mango blossom. Okay, so when they're in bloom, mangoes flower in the morning from 5 until about 12. They don't flower after that. And those the antithesis, or whatever the case is, the actual flowers, when they're in bloom, they only bloom for about 72 hours. They only open and bloom for 72 hours, and that's it. It's done. And they only do it in the morning. So ideally, any spraying that happens should be done only at night, and certainly not in the morning. Okay, because whatever is foraging on those things in the morning is going to get completely wiped out, including the hoverflies and all the ants and anything else that will pollinate that particular crop. But even anyway, in addition to what I've already told you about the mangoes, let me just give you an insight as to quickly into the research that I found, so you have an idea of what I'm doing with my micro MBAs. And if you're interested in the series, you can comment below and let me know, and I'll add you to the list of subscribers there. It is free. There's no charge for this. Okay, this is my paying it forward and paying back for what I've benefited out of beekeeping and for my passion, sharing the passion. Okay. But mangoes, if you're growing mangoes right now, if you know anybody that's a mango farmer, send them this video and clip it to this little spot here. Okay. Mangoes without in open pollination, okay, open pollination, you get a 2% fruit set. If you exclude bees from that pollination, you get a 1.4% fruit set from the flies, from the hoverflies and other things. If you exclude the flies and whatever, and you only have the bees involved, you get a 1.1%. So when you combine the two, you end up with 2.1%. What's not to like about that? That's about a 40% increase, guys, in the fruit set, okay, by using honeybees. And the pollination ratio there should be about 7 hives. The ideal one, on 3 hives, they had there was about a 12%, 9%, beg your pardon, 9.9% increase in yield. Okay, when they had 5 hives per hectare, they had a 12%, 14% on the 5 hives per hectare. The 7 hives per hectare was the best one, most efficient one, which is about 23%. Can you imagine having an extra 23% yield of mangoes in your orchard if you're a mango grower? Awesome. And that's using 7 hives per hectare. Now, that may cost you money to go and pay somebody to bring their hives to your orchard. But dudes, the South African prices on that is roughly about 1,000 Rand, 1,100, between 900 and 1,100 Rand per hive per hectare. At 7 hives per hectare, that's going to be 7 grand a hive. But at the latest kind of pricing of mangoes per kilogram, this is the fruit mangoes. This is not the acha and the okay, so this is the fruit version of the mangoes. You're making like 20. You're going to make an extra 20 grand per hectare, on top of what you would normally make. So you pay out 7 grand, you make 20 grand, you come out with 13 grand, give or take, per hectare, on top of what you would normally make, right? Because you have an additional, like, however many tons it works out to per hectare. If you read my newsletter, get my newsletter, you'll see all the numbers. Okay, they're in there. But anyway, guys, now I'm really going to wrap up. Happy beekeeping. Try not to mow your lawns because the bees need the dandelions and the daffodils and everything else that's growing out there. You know, try not pick any flowers. You know, I was going to say that the other thing you could be planting, Jack, you asked me early on, you could be any herb or veg. Most veg that we eat on our plates, bees will benefit from. So it's onions, although they don't pollinate the actual onions because they're on the ground, they will go to the flowers, and then you get more seeds for the following year. Okay, that's one of the big uses of commercial pollinators is for onion seeds, believe it or not. Same with carrot seeds. And you have lucerne seeds as well, same thing. Okay, so any one of those would benefit. I've got some butternut about to go. I've got cucumbers, which is part of the cucurbits. They benefit from the bees benefit from them. So it's all good, guys. It's all good. All right, Shanana, I'm going to buzz off, and hopefully you've enjoyed today's session, and comment below as to whatever you're up to. If I haven't answered a question that you've had, then put it in the comments below. Subscribe to get any future videos, which I'm going to be doing a lot more of over the next few days. I don't think they're going to be lives, but I'll do more of these over the next few days so that we can get some more traction on the channel and get the existing subscribers something new to watch, because I'm sure you've probably caught up on everything by now. Check the subscription for the newsletter. If you're interested in any courses, we've got an online course. I'll put a link to that to our other website, our sister website. And actually, you can, if you're wanting to know how to get bees, this would be a good one to go and check out. Okay, because I give a free video in that. And that's it, guys. Join an association, read some books, watch some videos, ideally ones that are from your own country would make sense. I mean, I do videos focusing on beekeeping in South Africa, but they apply to anywhere, most places, I would say, in the world at least, other than perhaps the wintering, because we do wintering a bit different. We only have about 6 to 8 weeks of winter time in Southern Africa, in the Southern Hemisphere, and it's typically not that cold, other than for maybe a week or two of black frost. So we don't have to worry about wintering that much as you could do in the Northern Hemisphere, where you start having to do insulation and doing some crazy stuff with winter, and also making sure, a lot of guys will talk about doing miticiding, mite sprays and mite checks, which is all cool. Don't get me wrong, that's all fine. But there's an extra level of stuff that typically I haven't done. I either don't practice it, or I'm in sites. I choose my sites where I don't end up having snow and so largely sub-zero temperatures. And I do that because it's extra work. It's also not extra work for me, but it really does put the bees at at risk. Let's put it that way, and makes them work harder. If I was a bee, I wouldn't like that. So why do I put the bees in that position as well? But if you're in that position and it's the only way that you can do it, then you want to use things like insulation, and you want to make sure that you reduce. You not have to do this in the Northern Hemisphere now because it's spring. But come the next season, you're going to use insulation. You're going to reduce your colonies down. You're going to combine weaker colonies, all those sort of things when it comes to the winter in the Northern Hemisphere. But thankfully, Northern Hemisphere right now, you're thriving, and you're going to get some amazing different types of honeys that are going to taste nothing like the stuff that you get in the shelves. And maybe a little tidbit before I go, because you're going to get honey, people are going to ask, like, what do I have to have? Actually, I saw this the other day. What do you have to have on your labels? The legal requirements for labels. Okay, so this is not an endless list. You might want to just double check in your country what you have to have on your list. But essentially, you need to say that it's what it is. It's honey. You need to have a date of expiry or a batch date or a bottle date. something to say the date that it was bottled. Okay. Some countries require an expiry date, some just require a date of bottling or shelf life, or whatever the case is. Some countries require that you have to put on there that it's not suitable for infants under the age of under 12 months old because of botulism. You don't have to say botulism, but you could just say because it's just not suitable. Some countries require that, some countries don't. You would have to that it's actually legally required, and other countries you don't. But that's what I say. Double check on your own packaging laws. Okay, I'm not a lawyer, so disclaimer. The other important thing would be your contact details, so social media and or address, and the country of origin is really vital at this point in time because majority, as I say, there's a good deal of imported honeys, especially that are ending up on shelves in retail stores. Is not pure honey. It's either adulterated or cut or has some form of C4 glucose type honey in it, sugar in it rather. Is that a Freudian slip there? That there's a bit of honey in the sugar, maybe. But yeah, thank you for joining me today, guys. And let me know what honey you got. What honey is your favorite? Comment in the comments below. And I'm really going to end now. So ciao. That was a long haul, guys. But I feel a bit guilty because I ended up missing my time slot on YouTube because I had a glitch with the webcam. Thought I'd make up for it now. Okay, cool. Ciao, ciao. All the best.